Hello, this is Ms. DB, and today we are going to go over how to do some of the problems from your Chapter 8, Section 7 worksheet, which is on rational and radical functions, and we're going to be talking most about radical functions in this section. So we're going to solve and graph radical functions. That's our learning goal, our objective. And here's an example of what we're going to be working with here. Radical functions are square root functions. They could also be cubed root or fourth roots, etc. When you graph a radical function, here's the parent function. It looks kind of like a logarithmic function, but it's going to increase rather rapidly, and then it's going to kind of level out, but it'll keep increasing. It won't have an asymptote. It'll just kind of gradually keep increasing kind of slowly. The domain of the parent function is that x has to be greater than or equal to 0. We're only going to use positive numbers for x because if you take the square root of a negative number, you get an imaginary number. We're not going to use that as part of our domain. The range is also that y will be greater than or equal to 0 for any of those positive x values. You'll get a positive number when you take the square root of it when we graph it. You can use a table of values in order to graph your function, and you can see that while the parent function has a domain of positive numbers, if you shift it to the right 3 units, then it will move over and your domain will change. In this example, our domain is x is greater than or equal to -3, and the range still stayed at y is greater than or equal to 0. So it depends on what transformations you do, what your domain and range is. But here's what it would be for the parent function. So while you can use a table of values to help you graph, it's much easier to use Desmos.com to graph or Sketchpad. Let's open up a Sketchpad file and do the square root of x and then the square root of x plus 3 real quick. So here's your Sketchpad. Remember that you can make more pages in Sketchpad by going to File, Document Options, and Add Page. You can add as many pages as you need. I'll add like 4 pages here. And when you do that, down at the bottom you'll get the page tab so that you know you can go to the different page numbers like that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and graph, plot new function, the square root of x. To get to the square root of x, you go to the functions menu and pick square root, which is SQRT, and then just put the x in there. So square root of x is going to graph. And there it is. Looks very similar to the one that was on the sheet I was showing you. Now let's graph the square root of x plus 3. When you do that, you need to make sure that your plus 3 goes inside the parentheses. So the parentheses is after the 3 like that, and it'll check up here to make sure your function looks correct. And there we can see that it shifted. It was translated to the left 3 units, which is what adding 3 to the x does to the graph. Let's see what it would be if we wanted to take the square root of x plus 3. So the square root of x, and now I want to add the 3 outside of the parentheses, so I clicked outside of it and I'm going to do plus 3. What will that do to your graph? Well, we've done lots of transformations this year, and you should know that that's going to move it up 3. And you can change your colors of both your equations, your functions, and the graphs by going to Display and then Color. So if I wanted to put more than one graph on the same page, I could change their color so that they match. You can also drag the functions next to the graph so that it's easier to see them. And this was this one. Let's change this one to a different color as well. Let's change it to red, and I'm even going to change it to bold line, since that was my parent function. So there's f of x equals the square root of x, and then I translated it to the left 3 and up 3. All right, going back to our worksheet. Let's look at some other types of things you're going to be asked to do in this section. This is very similar to what we just did. So you're going to graph either at Sketchpad or Desmos. Let's look at our Sketchpad graph to see what negative square root of x would be. So I'm going to graph negative square root of x and see what that does. It flipped it over, reflected it over the x-axis. Let's put that next to it and let's change these to a different color. Now, don't graph more than 4 functions on one page. After that, go to a new page. But remember, you don't have to make a new Sketchpad file. You can just go to one of your other pages to do your other ones. So if you're making your graphs in Sketchpad, you don't have to copy and paste them into the worksheet. You can just leave them all in Sketchpad, and then you can go to File, Save, and you can save this and attach it with your worksheet. If you're making them at Desmos.com, then you will need to take screenshots of your graphs and then attach them by copying and pasting them and putting them right here. My domain, let's fill this one out a little bit more. So when x was 1, y was negative 1. When x was 4, the square root of 4 is 2, so I would get negative 2. When x is 3, I would get the square root of 9, which is 3, but I have a negative in front, so that would be negative 3. That's how you do this part. The transformation, I said, was a reflection across the x-axis. And the domain of this, I can flip back, but the domain was x has to be greater than or equal to 0. I'm going to underline that to show that it can be greater than or equal to. And the range, let's go back and look at the range before I type that in, of the negative square root of x. That was the green one down here. So the domain is x is greater than or equal to 0, but look at my range. The y values are never greater than 0. So they are y is less than or equal to 0. So I would type that the range is y is less than or equal to 0. And it can be 0 because the square root of 0 is 0, so I will underline that less than sign. Okay, so, and then I'm going to do another graph with a Desmos practice. All right, so here's a little review of the transformations. If you add a number, you move it up. If you add a negative number, you move it down, or if you subtract a number. Horizontal translations, if you subtract a number to the x, it goes right. If you add a number to the x, it goes left. Reflections, if you take a negative in front of your square root, it'll reflect across the x-axis like we just looked at. If you put the negative on the x underneath the square root, then it reflects across the y-axis. All right, let's graph and describe these, how they would look. So I'm going to graph the square root of x. I'll use Desmos this time. And then I will graph the square root of x plus 3, and you will tell me what happens. We just did that one, and we did one like number 4 too. So let's do number 5. What do you think will happen here? Now, we talked about adding the 8, but we didn't talk about what multiplying by 4 will do. So what kind of transformation didn't we talk about? We talked about translations, up, down, left, or right, and we talked about reflections, but we didn't talk about vertical stretches and horizontal stretches. So I'm going to go to Desmos.com, and I'm going to graph the square root of x here. Now, to do the square root of x at Desmos, I'm going to make this a little smaller so you can see it. Come here. I have to make my screen a little bit smaller so you can see that there is a, if you go to the keypad, there's a functions box here, and that's where you're going to find square root. Now it's on trig right now, then there's a stats, and then here's what the one we need, miscellaneous. So under the miscellaneous, look for square root. Here's square root right here. So we need, now you could change this to cubed root or fourth root. We just need square root, so I don't think you have to put anything here. Let's see if that graphs it. No, it needs something. So put the 2 there. That tells us that this is the square root function. We could have also done the square root of x this way, and it would graph the same thing. That's probably a little easier. So there's the square root function. Now on our worksheet we were going to do, I can just not quite see it. Let me move that to the bottom. There we go. So I was going to graph the square root, or the 4 times the square root of x plus 8. So I'm going to leave the blue square root of x there, and I'm going to type in 4 times the square root of x plus 8. X plus 8. And I make sure that that looks the same, and it does. So now I'm going to make my screen a little bit bigger here. I'll hide my keypad so I can look and see what I've got going here. All right, so I've got, let me zoom out just a little bit. We can see that it definitely did move to the left, and I'm going to assume that that moved 8 units to the left because it's a plus 8. And the 4 has stretched this thing out. So it has a, go back to my worksheet here to describe that transformation. Oops, wrong worksheet. There we go. It has a translation, 8 units left, and it has a stretch by 4. All right, so let's move on to the next problems here. If you want to, you can graph these, and then you can decide how it has changed your function. And then the last one, you're just going to write the equation with these things. Reflect it across the y-axis, stretch it by a factor of 7, and translate it 3 down. And that's it. So, oh, I forgot to show that if you are at Desmos, when you're at Desmos and you need to attach your graphs, here's how to do that. You need to take a screenshot of your graph. Let me move this over just a little bit. If you had a problem where you needed to attach that, take a snip or a screenshot. There we go. It's copied. And then I can copy that. And then I can go back to my worksheet. And let's say that I wanted to, you don't have to paste your graphs in here, but let's say that I was going to demonstrate something. And there's your screenshot. So you can either use Desmos or Sketchpad when you are asked to show your graphs, like for 1 and 2. For numbers 3 through 8, you don't have to show your graphs, but you can if you want to help you. It might help you answer the questions if you can look at your graph at the same time. If you have any questions on this, please let me know. Thank you very much.